Before we begin, I want to be clear about something. The story you're about to hear is based on real events from World War II in the Pacific, but some conversations, some personal accounts, and certain details have been dramatized and imagined for narrative purposes. The core facts are real. The transformation of Japanese military doctrine is real. The impact of the Winchester shotgun is documented history. But when I tell you what Private Tanaka was thinking that night in the jungle, understand that's my interpretation, inspired by survivor accounts and historical records. This is history told as a story, not a documentary transcript. All right, let's go back to November 1943, to an island called Bougainville, to the night everything changed. Jungle sounds, insects, distant water, leaves rustling. November 2nd, 1943. Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. Imagine you're Private Masaru Tanaka. You're 22 years old. You've been in the Imperial Japanese Army for 3 years. You've survived campaigns in China. You've fought on Guadalcanal. You've learned to move through jungle darkness like water flowing around rocks. Silent. Deadly, confident. Tonight, you and 11 other men are conducting what you've been trained for your entire military career, a night infiltration attack. Your Type 38 rifle has an 18-inch bayonet fixed to it. That bayonet is more important than the rifle itself. Because everyone knows, everyone in the Japanese military knows, that when you get close enough to use cold steel, you win. Americans can't match Japanese soldiers in close combat. It's not even close. Your sergeant told you before the mission. The Americans fear the darkness. They huddle in their foxholes like scared children, dependent on their machines and their radios and their artillery. But we are the night itself, and you believe him. Why wouldn't you? For 3 years, this has been true. For 3 years, Japanese night fighters have terrorized Allied forces across the entire Pacific. The evidence is overwhelming. In China, your bayonet charges broke numerically superior Chinese forces again and again. In the Philippines, Americans ran when Japanese infantry charged with fixed bayonets. At Singapore, 30,000 British troops, defending what they thought was an impregnable fortress, surrendered to a smaller Japanese force that had simply outfought them at close quarters. So, yeah, you're confident. Cautious, but confident. Pause for effect. And then it happens. A sound you've never heard before in 3 years of combat. Not the sharp crack of a rifle. Not even the rapid-fire chatter of a machine gun. This is something else entirely. A deep, throaty roar that seems to come from everywhere at once. And the jungle to your left, where 3 of your squad mates were moving just seconds ago, simply disappears, shredded, atomized, erased. You hit the ground. Your ears are ringing. You can't process what just happened. Where's Corporal Sato? Where's Private Nakamura? Where's... The sound comes again. That terrible metallic chunk-chunk boom. And Sergeant Oda, your squad leader, the man who's kept you alive for 3 years, is thrown backward. His chest just opens, like someone unzipped him from the inside. Welcome to the Pacific War's dirty little secret. Welcome to the weapon that nobody talks about in the history books. Welcome to the Winchester Model 97 pump-action shotgun. And Private Tanaka? His war and the entire philosophy of Japanese military doctrine just changed forever. Music transition. Ominous. Building. Okay, let's back up. Because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand what the Japanese military believed about close combat. And I'm not talking about propaganda. I'm not talking about what they told civilians back home. I'm talking about Actual military doctrine written into training manuals, taught at every level, believed by everyone from privates to generals. The 1942 Infantry Manual, this is a real document by the way, stated this, and I quote, "The spiritual strength of the Japanese soldier makes one man equal to 10 enemies. Western soldiers, corrupted by material comfort, cannot withstand the shock of cold steel." Now, you might hear that and think, oh, that's just typical wartime bravado. That's just pumping up the troops. But here's the thing. They actually believed it. And for good reason. Because for years, it had been proven true over and over again. Let me give you some context. At the Imperial Army training facilities, recruits spent, and this is documented, 32 hours each week practicing bayonet techniques. 32 hours. Compare that to 8 hours on marksmanship. Think about that ratio. The Japanese military spent 4 times as much time teaching soldiers how to stab someone than how to shoot them. This wasn't random. This was calculated doctrine based on their experience in China, in Manchuria, in every theater where they'd fought. The philosophy was simple. Close the distance. Get within sword range or bayonet range. Force the enemy into hand-to-hand combat. And when you do that, Japanese spiritual strength, Japanese training, Japanese warrior culture will always overcome whatever material advantages the enemy has. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, who planned Japan's devastatingly successful Malayan campaign, wrote in his tactical analysis, and this is a real quote, "The Americans hide behind their machines. When forced to fight man to man, they crumble like wet paper." Was he just being arrogant? No, he was summarizing what Japanese forces had observed across multiple theaters of war. It had worked. Again and again and again. It had worked. Pause. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding Japanese forces in the Solomons in late 1943, said this, "Night belongs to the Japanese soldier. In darkness, when American technology fails, our spiritual superiority becomes absolute. One Japanese soldier with a bayonet is worth a squad of Americans with their machines." Now, here's what you need to understand. This wasn't racism. This wasn't blind nationalism. This was tactical assessment based on observed reality. Japanese forces had been superior in close combat. They had dominated night fighting. They had broken larger forces through sheer fighting spirit and superior close-quarters training. The problem was, the Americans had figured out a solution. And that solution was sitting in a Marine's hands on Guadalcanal in August 1942, looking exactly like the shotgun his father used to hunt ducks back in Nebraska. Sound effects. Jungle at night. Distant ocean. American voices speaking low. August 21st, 1942. Guadalcanal. Near the Ilu River. Sergeant Yoshio Takahashi. Now this is a real person documented in multiple sources. Was a 12-year veteran of the Imperial Army. He'd survived 3 years of brutal fighting in China. He'd been in more hand-to-hand combat situations than most soldiers experience in a lifetime. He knew his job, and he was good at it. That night, he's leading his squad through the kunai grass. That's the tall elephant grass that grows all over Guadalcanal, moving toward Marine positions. His men are spread out in proper infiltration formation. They're silent, disciplined. These aren't raw recruits. These are elite infantry who've trained for exactly this kind of operation. At 400 meters out, they can hear American voices, careless, loud. Americans talking, probably smoking cigarettes, maybe complaining about the food or the mosquitoes or whatever. Perfect targets. At 50 meters, Takahashi signals for the final approach. They're going to slip past the sentries, get among the Americans, and kill them in their sleeping positions with bayonets and knives. Quick, quiet. The way it's supposed to be done. And then that sound. Now we have an actual account from one of the survivors of this engagement. Private Kenji Nakamura kept a diary that was later recovered. In it, he wrote, and this is translated from Japanese, Sergeant Takahashi simply vanished. Where he had been standing, there was only red mist and pieces of vegetation falling like rain. The weapon that made that sound was a Winchester Model 97 pump-action shotgun, loaded with .00 buckshot, and the Marine holding it was Corporal Jim Bradley, who'd been hunting ducks on his family farm in Ohio since he was 8 years old. Years later, Bradley was interviewed about that night. He said, "They came at us screaming, bayonets flashing. I could see them in the starlight. At about 30 yards, I started firing. I didn't even need to aim carefully. Just pointed in the general direction and pumped that action. The buckshot spreads out, you know, like throwing a handful of gravel, except each piece is a .33 caliber ball. You can't miss if you're trying." Let me explain what happened in that moment, because this is where the story gets technical for a second. But stick with me, it's important. A standard .00 buckshot shell for a 12-gauge shotgun contains 9 pellets. Each pellet is 33 inches in diameter. That's basically 9 separate bullets in one shell. When fired, those pellets spread out. At 30 yards, which was typical jungle engagement range, that spread is about 2 to 3 feet wide. So imagine you're a Japanese soldier charging with a bayonet. You're committed to the attack. You're screaming, "Tenoheika Banzai, long live the Emperor." You're moving fast, doing everything you've been trained to do. And the Marine points that shotgun in your general direction and pulls the trigger. You're not dodging 9 separate projectiles spread across a 3-foot area. You're just not. It's physically impossible. And the Winchester Model 97 had one other feature that made it absolutely devastating. It didn't have what's called a trigger disconnector. That means if you held the trigger down and just pumped the action, rack that slide back and forth, it would fire every time the action closed. 6 shells in under 2 seconds. 54 individual projectiles downrange in less time than it takes to read this sentence. Pause for effect. The Japanese called it the thunder weapon. Marines called it the trench broom. And it changed warfare in the Pacific overnight. So what was the Japanese military's response to this new weapon? How did they adapt their tactics after Guadalcanal? They didn't. Captain Akira Yamamoto filed an after-action report on August 23, 1942, 2 days after that first encounter with the shotguns. His report, and this is from military archives, described the shotgun as a cowardly device, wielded without honor by Marines who refuse proper combat engagement. His recommendation? Increased spiritual determination and faster movement to close distance before the weapon can be employed. Read that again. His solution to facing shotguns was to be more spiritually determined and move faster into their effective range. This is what I mean about institutional rigidity. The Japanese military had built its entire doctrine around close combat superiority. When they encountered a weapon that negated that superiority, they couldn't accept what it meant, because accepting it would mean admitting that 50 years of training and philosophy were obsolete. So they doubled down. During the Battle of Edson's Ridge, also called Bloody Ridge, in September 1942, Marines used their shotguns to stop 3 separate banzai charges, 3 full-scale human wave attacks, each with hundreds of soldiers, each convinced that their spirit and steel would overcome American firepower. Lieutenant Tadashi Suzuki, another real person from the historical record, wrote home to his family. He said, "The Americans have a demon weapon. It speaks with thunder and throws metal rain that cuts down entire squads. But our officers say this is proof of their cowardice, that true warriors have nothing to fear from machines." The Japanese High Command agreed with the officers. General Hyakutake's staff concluded that the shotgun is a terror weapon used by Americans who lack courage for proper combat. Spiritual strength and speed will overcome any mechanical device. And so the slaughter continued. For another year, for 2 years, for 3 years. How many men died charging into shotgun fire because their doctrine said that spiritual strength could overcome material reality? The answer is tens of thousands. Literally, tens of thousands. Let me take you inside a Japanese field hospital in July 1943. New Georgia Island, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, chief surgeon at the 17th Field Hospital, is trying to save a young soldier who's been hit by buckshot at close range. The soldier has 11 separate entry wounds across his chest and abdomen. 11 separate wound channels. Multiple organs damaged. Bones shattered in 4 places. Blood loss that's essentially impossible to manage with the limited supplies available. Dr. Tanaka documented what he called the shotgun syndrome in his medical reports. He wrote, "Traditional battlefield surgery prepared us for single projectile wounds. A bullet enters here, creates a wound channel, exits there or lodges somewhere. We understand this anatomy. We can treat this with reasonable expectations. But these American weapons, they create something we cannot address. Multiple wound channels in a single patient. 9, 10, 12 separate entries. The trauma is catastrophic. A man hit at 30 meters shows damage consistent with artillery shrapnel strikes, but concentrated in one area of the body. Internal organs are not just damaged, they are shredded across multiple planes. We lose patients not from a single catastrophic wound, but from cumulative shock and blood loss from a dozen smaller wounds. And here's the brutal mathematics of it. Japanese casualty analysis from the Central Solomons Campaign, these are actual military statistics, showed that banzai charges against American units armed with rifles had a 34% success rate. High casualties, 40 to 60%, but sometimes you'd achieve the objective. Sometimes you'd break through their lines. Against shotgun-equipped units, success rate, 0%. 0. Not once did a banzai charge succeed against Marines with shotguns, and casualty rates exceeded 85%, usually closer to 95%. Think about what that means. You're a Japanese officer. You're planning a night attack. You know that if the enemy has shotguns, you're sending your men to die. Not to fight, to die. And you do it anyway, because doctrine demands it. Colonel Teo Ito reviewed these casualty statistics and wrote in his private journal, "This was discovered after the war. Our night attacks have become suicide missions. The Americans have learned to make the darkness their ally. We have taught them to fear our bayonets, and they have responded by bringing weapons that make our bayonets irrelevant. We continue these attacks not because they work, but because our entire military philosophy has no alternative." Sound. Heavy rain. Distant thunder. November 7, 1943. Cape Torokina, Bougainville Island. This is where everything changes. This is where 3 years of doctrine, centuries of warrior culture, and deeply held beliefs about combat all come crashing down in 4 minutes of mechanical slaughter. Major Shigeru Chagaru's battalion, 850 men, all trained specifically in night infiltration tactics, is about to attack Marine positions held by the 3rd Raider Battalion. Let me paint you a picture of who these men were. These weren't conscripts pulled off farms and given 3 weeks of basic training. These were professional soldiers, veterans with years of combat experience, men who'd survived China, who'd fought on Guadalcanal, who'd trained their entire adult lives for exactly this kind of operation. They'd spent the previous week observing Marine positions, learning patrol patterns, identifying weak points. They knew where the American sentries were. They knew when the Marines changed guard. They'd planned their approach routes through the densest jungle where moonlight couldn't penetrate. Everything was perfect. Everything was professional. This attack should have worked. And they were confident. Why wouldn't they be? This was what they did. This was their specialty. Night infiltration had been Japan's ace in the hole for 3 years. When you can't match American artillery, when you can't match American air power, when you can't match American industrial production, you adapt. You fight at night. You get close. You use cold steel. And you win. Or at least, that's how it used to work. The Marines, on the other hand, had learned some hard lessons over the past year. They'd learned them in blood, watching friends die in banzai charges, watching positions get overrun because they couldn't see what was coming in the darkness. But they'd adapted. And adaptation, it turns out, beats tradition every single time. They'd positioned themselves in what's called interlocking fields of fire. Imagine a killing zone where every single square meter can be engaged by at least 2, usually 3 different weapons. No dead spaces, no gaps. Every shotgun has clear sight lines that overlap with the Marines to their left and right. It's like a net made of buckshot. Nothing gets through. They'd loaded their Winchester Model 97s and Model 12s with fresh brass shells, 00 buckshot. 9 pellets per shell, remember? And they'd learned something interesting about shotgun tactics. You don't all fire at once. That's amateur hour. You fire in sequence, in a rolling barrage that never stops. One Marine fires, starts reloading. Another fires while the first is reloading. A third fires. By the time the third Marine is reloading, the first is ready to fire again. Constant, overlapping fire. No gaps. No pauses. Just an endless wall of lead. And they'd practiced their fire discipline. The young Marines who'd panicked in early engagements, who'd fired all their shells in the first 10 seconds, and then stood there with empty guns? Those mistakes had been corrected. Now they were calm, professional. They'd seen the elephant, as they used to say. They knew what was coming, and they were ready. When Chagaru's men emerge from the jungle at 3:15 in the morning, they walk into what one survivor called a wall of thunder and metal. But that description doesn't really capture what happened. Let me try to make you understand. Imagine you're in the first wave of that attack. You've moved silently through 2 kilometers of dense jungle. Your heart is pounding, but you're in control. You're with your friends, men you've trained with, fought with, bled with. You trust them with your life. You're 40 meters from the American positions. Your bayonet is fixed. Your finger is on the trigger of your rifle. But you won't need it. You'll use the bayonet. That's what you've been trained for. 35 meters. You can hear Americans talking. They don't know you're there. Perfect. 30 meters. Someone gives the signal. You scream Tenoheka Banzai and start to charge. You're running now, committed, adrenaline surging. This is it. This is what you've trained for. This is how you prove your worth as a soldier, as a warrior, as a Japanese man. And then the world explodes. Not one gun. Dozens of them. That deep boom that rattles your chest. That metallic chunk as Marines rack their shotgun actions. And suddenly, the men around you are falling. Not falling, disintegrating. Sergeant Hashimoto, who was running beside you 2 seconds ago, is thrown backward like he's been hit by a truck. His chest is just gone, opened, shredded. You try to keep running. You're trained to keep moving, to close the distance. But the fire doesn't stop. It's continuous. Every time you think there's a gap, another shotgun roars. The air itself seems to be made of metal. You can hear the buckshot flying past. This weird whistling sound that you'll hear in nightmares for the rest of your life if you survive the next 10 seconds. 20 meters now. You're still somehow alive. Men are falling all around you. You can feel their blood splashing on your face. You can hear screaming, not just the battle cry, but screaming in pain, in terror, in the awful realization that this attack has failed, that you're all going to die, that there's no way forward and no way back. Sergeant Yukio Mishima, he survived, and thank God he did because we have his account, was in the third wave. He said the first wave simply ceased to exist. One moment, there were 100 men charging. The next moment, there were pieces of men, and the Marines were already engaging the second wave. Mishima was knocked down by bodies falling around him. Men falling forward, falling backward, falling on top of him. And in that moment, he made a decision that probably saved his life. He played dead. He lay there, under the bodies of his friends, for the rest of the night. 6 hours. Can you imagine? 6 hours lying in blood and gore, listening to the moaning of wounded men, knowing that if you move, if you make a sound, a Marine with a shotgun will end you. He gave testimony to military investigators later. He said, "We could not close the distance. Our entire tactical doctrine depends on closing to bayonet range. But at 40 meters, the thunder began. Not one gun, dozens of them, firing in sequence. It was like trying to charge into a waterfall. Men fell in groups, 3, 4, 5 at a time. The jungle itself seemed to explode. I saw Lieutenant Hagawa. I'd served under him for 2 years in China. He was a good officer, fair, brave. He took a full blast to his chest at maybe 20 meters. It didn't just wound him. His chest opened, bloomed like a flower. That's the only way I can describe it. Red petals. There was no glory in this death, no honorable combat, just execution. We were being executed, and we couldn't even reach the enemy to die properly. That testimony right there. That's the moment Japanese military doctrine died. Not officially, that would come later. But in the hearts and minds of the men who survived Cape Torokina, they knew, they all knew. This wasn't war. This was feeding men into a machine that turned them into corpses. The 17th Army's Intelligence Section compiled a secret report analyzing the Cape Torokina disaster. These weren't propagandists. These weren't politicians. These were professional military intelligence officers trying to understand what the hell had happened to an elite battalion. The numbers they came up with: 89% of casualties from shotgun wounds. Not rifles, not machine guns, not artillery, shotguns, a hunting weapon, a weapon that was supposed to be dishonorable, cowardly, beneath the dignity of professional soldiers. Average engagement range: 25 meters. That's close. That's inside the effective range where Japanese bayonet charges should have worked, where spiritual determination and warrior training should have made the difference. Except it didn't. At 25 meters, 9.33 caliber pellets spread across a 3-foot pattern don't care about your spirit. They don't care about your training. They just kill you. Average time from first contact to unit destruction: 4 minutes. Read that again. 4 minutes. From the first shot to the point where organized resistance ceased. 4 minutes to destroy a battalion of elite infantry. That's not combat. That's industrial slaughter. 20 men lost in those 4 minutes. That's 180 men per minute. 3 men per second. Every second, for 4 solid minutes, 3 Japanese soldiers died. Most of them never got within bayonet range. Most of them died screaming, charging forward because that's what they'd been trained to do, knowing it was useless, knowing the thunder guns would get them, but charging anyway because to do otherwise would be cowardice. The report's conclusion, and I want to read this word for word because it's so significant, such a dramatic reversal of everything the Japanese military had believed for decades. Enemy automatic weapons and shotguns have negated our advantages in night combat and spiritual strength. Traditional tactics are no longer viable against this combination of firepower. Recommendations: Immediately cease night infiltration attacks against positions known to be equipped with shotgun weapons. Investigate defensive tactics and long-range engagement strategies. The age of the bayonet charge is over. That last sentence. The age of the bayonet charge is over. This is November 1943. Japan has been at war for 6 years if you count China. The bayonet charge has been the foundation of Japanese infantry doctrine for 50 years. It's not just a tactic, it's a philosophy, a cultural identity, a way of proving manhood and martial virtue. And now, because of a duck-hunting shotgun wielded by American farm boys, that entire philosophy is dead. It had taken nearly a year and a half and tens of thousands of casualties for the Japanese military to officially acknowledge what individual soldiers had known since Guadalcanal. You can't bayonet charge a shotgun and win. You can't use spiritual strength to stop buckshot. You can't overcome material reality with philosophy. The thunder in the jungle had spoken, and its message was final. Quiet. Somber music. Let's pause the tactical analysis for a minute. Let's stop talking about casualty rates and weapon specifications and military doctrine. Because at the end of the day, this isn't a story about weapons or tactics. It's a story about people. Young men, mostly. Boys, really, who were asked to do impossible things and did them anyway, on both sides. I want to share with you something I found while researching this story. There's a diary that survived the war. It belonged to Lieutenant Kenji Ishikawa, Imperial Japanese Army, 23rd Infantry Regiment. The diary was found in a cave on Peleliu after the battle there, along with Ishikawa's remains. His family received it in 1946, and parts of it were later donated to the Japanese War Memorial Museum. Reading through that diary is like watching someone's soul slowly break. You can track his psychological journey over months, a journey that thousands of Japanese soldiers experienced, but few survived to document. Let me read you some entries. June 1943, 3 months before Cape Torokana. Today we received new replacements from the home islands. Young men, eager, believing in our cause. I remember being like them. I remember believing that our spiritual training made us invincible, that Western soldiers couldn't match Japanese determination. I still want to believe it. The Americans rely on their machines because they lack warrior spirit. When we close to sword range, they will break. They always do. Our training is superior. Our determination is absolute. Today I led bayonet drills. The men are sharp, ready. I am confident. You can hear it, right? The confidence, the certainty. He believes every word he's writing. September 1943. Afternoon, Georgia. Sato's entire company was destroyed last night in a night attack. 180 men, 15 survivors. Sato himself was killed. They found his body in the morning, 30 meters from American positions. He never reached their lines. The survivors speak of thunder weapons that kill 5 men with 1 shot. They speak of being unable to close the distance, of charging into walls of metal. Our officers say this is American propaganda designed to break our spirits, that we must move faster and strike harder. But I saw the survivors' faces. These were not men broken by propaganda. These were men who had seen something that destroyed their understanding of warfare. That's the first crack in his certainty. Right there. He's not saying he doesn't believe the doctrine anymore. He's saying he saw something in those survivors' eyes that troubled him. November 1943, right after Cape Torokana. I have seen the thunder guns myself. They are real. They don't kill 5 men. They destroy them, erase them, turn them from living soldiers into scattered pieces of meat in less than a second. Yesterday I led an assault on American positions. We lost 140 men in 3 minutes. 3 minutes! I lost half my company before we even saw the enemy clearly. There is no honor in this death. No chance for glory. Just sudden erasure. One moment you are alive, committed to the attack, screaming for the Emperor, believing that this time you will break through. And the next, you are red mist hanging in the jungle air, and someone else is stepping over what used to be you. The thunder guns have broken something in us. We still attack because orders demand it. To refuse would be cowardice, would dishonor our families, would violate everything we've been taught. But we know, all of us know, that we are going to our deaths. Not glorious death in battle where skill and courage might make a difference. Just slaughter, execution. We are being fed into American machine guns and thunder weapons like bullets being loaded into a rifle. We are ammunition in someone else's war. December 1943. Private Tanaka refused to participate in tonight's attack. He said he would rather be executed for cowardice than charge into the thunder guns again. Captain Yamamoto had him beaten and then forced him to lead the attack as punishment. Tanaka was killed in the first minute. Maybe that was what he wanted. Maybe death by thunder gun is preferable to death by execution. At least it's faster. More and more men are developing what the Americans call combat fatigue. They shake uncontrollably before attacks. Some wet themselves. One man started crying and couldn't stop. These are not weak men. These are soldiers who've survived years of combat. But the thunder guns have broken them. How do you maintain discipline when every man knows the attack is suicide? How do you demand courage when courage is irrelevant? January 1944. I led my last attack tonight. 43 men went in. 7 came back. None of us made it within 20 meters of American positions. The thunder guns opened fire at 30 meters and didn't stop until we retreated. We left our dead where they fell. We always leave our dead now. There are too many, and recovering bodies means more men will die to the thunder guns. I can no longer tell my men that spiritual strength will overcome American firepower. They know it's a lie. I know it's a lie. But what else can I tell them? That we are fighting a war we cannot win with tactics that don't work? That would destroy what little morale remains. So I lie, and they pretend to believe, and we all go out to die together, maintaining the fiction of honorable combat. The diary ends there. January 17, 1944. Ishikawa was killed on Peleliu in February. He was 26 years old. His younger brother also died in the war. His father, who'd been so proud when both sons joined the army, committed suicide in 1946 when he learned they wouldn't be coming home. That's what war costs. Not just the men who die, but the families who survive them. The brothers who will never come home. The fathers who can't bear the loss. The mothers who wait for news that will never arrive. Now let's talk about the American side. Because the Marines weren't robots. They weren't emotionless killing machines. They were farm boys and city kids, mechanics and students, sons and brothers who had been handed the most effective close combat weapon ever created for jungle warfare, and told to use it. And use it they did, with devastating efficiency. But efficiency comes with a price. Marine Sergeant Dale Miller from Columbus, Ohio, enlisted 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was 19 years old. In August 1942, he wrote home to his mother, "Mom, we have these shotguns just like Dad uses for hunting ducks back home. They work real good in the jungle. Makes me think of those hunting trips with you and Dad and Tommy. Remember when Tommy shot his first duck and was so excited? I miss those days. Tell Tommy to keep practicing his shooting. When I get home, we'll go hunting together." Sweet letter, right? Innocent. A kid connecting his current experience to happy childhood memories, trying to make war seem normal, seem manageable. By December 1943, 16 months later, his tone had changed completely. He wrote, "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not show this letter to Dad or Tommy. Last night, I shot a Japanese officer. He couldn't have been more than 20 years old, Tommy's age. Baby face, probably some farmer's son. Just like me. He was charging with about 30 other men, screaming, bayonet pointed at my position. I raised my shotgun, the one that reminds me of Dad's hunting gun, and fired. Range was maybe 20 feet. The buckshot hit him center mass. Mom? It nearly cut him in half. 1 second he was a young man charging forward. The next second he was pieces, I know they're trying to kill us. I know it's him or me. I know I did the right thing. If I hadn't fired, he would have killed me or one of my friends. But God, Mom, what these guns do to a man? It's not like shooting a duck. It's not clean. It's not quick. It's just destructive. They don't just die. They come apart. Sometimes I wake up seeing their faces. In that split second before the buckshot hits, their eyes, their human eyes, Mom. Scared eyes. They know what's about to happen. They see the shotgun pointed at them, and they know. But they can't stop charging because their doctrine, their honor, their whole culture demands they keep moving forward. And I pull the trigger, and they're gone. Tell Dad I understand now why he never talked about the trenches in France. There's no glory in this kind of killing. No honor. Just necessary, brutal, efficient killing. I'll do my job. I'll keep killing them because if I don't, they'll kill me or my friends. I'll come home, God willing, and I'll marry Mary like we planned, and we'll have kids and a house, and I'll go to work every day like a normal person. But Mom, I don't think I'll ever go duck hunting again. I don't think I can ever hold a shotgun again after this war. The sound of it, the smell of it, what it does to people, I just can't. That letter breaks my heart every time I read it. This kid, and he was a kid, just 21 years old when he wrote that, carrying the weight of what he'd done, what he'd had to do, knowing it was necessary, but unable to escape the moral weight of it. Dale Miller survived the war. He came home in 1945, married Mary in 1946, had 3 kids, worked for 35 years at a machine shop in Columbus. He never went hunting again. He never told his kids what he did in the war. He never attended veteran reunions. He had nightmares 2 or 3 times a week until he died in 1991. Mary, his wife of 45 years, said at his funeral, "Dale was a good man, a gentleman. He loved his kids, he worked hard, he never raised his voice. But the war never left him. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. Sometimes he'd be crying quietly. He never wanted to talk about it. I did terrible things, he'd say. Necessary things, but terrible. I never knew the details until after he died, and I found his letters to his mother. Then I understood. My husband spent 46 years carrying the weight of having been good at killing. And in a way, the war killed him too. Just slowly. Think about that. Dale Miller didn't die in combat. He lived a full life. But did he really live? Or was he just a walking survivor, carrying ghosts? There's one more story I want to share with you. It's the most powerful story I came across in all my research. It happened in 1975, 30 years after the war ended, at a veterans conference in Hawaii. Jim Patterson, former Marine, attended the conference reluctantly. His daughter Christine had convinced him to go. "Dad, you need to talk to someone who understands," she'd said. "You have nightmares every night. You wake up screaming. You're 52 years old, and you're still fighting that war in your sleep. Maybe talking to other veterans will help." So Jim went. He hadn't talked about the war in 30 years. Not to his wife. Not to his kids. Not to anyone. What was there to say? How do you explain what it's like to be 19 years old with a shotgun in your hands, firing into waves of men charging at you with bayonets? How do you explain the sound, the smell, the sight of human beings transforming into red mist? At the conference, during a mixer event, Jim noticed a Japanese man about his age staring at him from across the room. The man approached slowly, and Jim saw his name tag, Toshihiko Ogawa, former Imperial Japanese Army officer. Through a translator, Ogawa said, "You were at Saipan, Hill 27, June 1944, Jim's blood went cold." "How did you know that?" "Because I was there too. I led the charge against your position that night." "And you," Ogawa's voice broke, "you were the one with the shotgun." Jim nodded, unable to speak. That night on Hill 27 had haunted him for 30 years. He'd killed 37 men in maybe 15 seconds. Just stood there with his Winchester Model 97, racking shells, firing, racking, firing, mechanically, efficiently, while men charged at him screaming and he cut them down like wheat. Ogawa's eyes filled with tears. I need to tell you something. I have hated you for 30 years. In my mind, you were a monster. You killed my entire squad. 37 men, friends, brothers, men I'd trained with, fought with, promised their families I'd bring them home. You killed them all. Some were 19 years old. Some had wives, children. They were good men. And you killed them in seconds. Jim felt like he was going to be sick. Here it was, the confrontation he dreaded, the accusation he deserved. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I was just... No. Ogawa raised his hand. Let me finish. I hated you for 30 years. But today I came here to thank you. What? Ogawa took a deep breath. Your thunder gun ended our madness quickly. My men died instantly. No suffering. No slow agony. One moment, they were alive, committed to an attack they knew was suicide. The next moment, they were gone. You saved them from hours or days of dying slowly from other wounds. You saved them from burning to death in bunkers or starving to death in caves. But more than that, you did what I could not do. I gave the order to attack. I led those men to their deaths knowing it was hopeless. Our doctrine demanded it. Our culture demanded it. To refuse would be cowardice. So I led them forward into your thunder gun, because I was too much of a coward to refuse an order that I knew would kill them all. You did what had to be done. I forced you to do it. I forced 37 men to die for a philosophy that should have changed years earlier. Their blood is on my hands, not yours. You were just the weapon. I was the one who pointed them at that weapon. Both men were crying now. Jim said, I see their faces every night. Every single one. That split second before the buckshot hits. The realization in their eyes. I see their faces too, Ogawa replied. Every morning when I wake up, every night when I try to sleep. 37 faces. 37 men whose families received letters saying their sons, their husbands, their brothers died honorably in battle for the emperor. But there was no honor, just waste. Just stupid, pointless waste, because we couldn't admit our doctrine was wrong. They stood there for a long moment, two old men who'd tried to kill each other 30 years ago, united now in understanding that war had made them both victims. Finally, Jim said, I forgive you for making me kill your men. Ogawa replied, I thank you for ending their suffering quickly. They embraced, both sobbing. Everyone else in the room stopped what they were doing to watch these two former enemies, one who'd pulled the trigger, one who'd given the order, finding some kind of peace in each other's shared trauma. Christine Patterson, Jim's daughter, witnessed that moment. She was interviewed in 2010, 5 years after her father's death. She said, that was the first time I ever saw my father really cry. These two old men, hugging and sobbing in the middle of this conference room. My father had never talked about the war to anyone. But after meeting Mr. Ogawa, everything changed. He told me everything that night. Everything he'd done. Everything he'd seen. Everything he'd carried for 30 years. He said the shotgun was both the best and worst thing that happened to him. It kept him alive. It let him come home and have a family and a life. But it gave him nightmares every single night for 30 years. Until he met Mr. Ogawa, he thought he was alone in that suffering. But Mr. Ogawa understood, not despite being on the opposite side, but because he was on the opposite side. My father and Mr. Ogawa wrote letters to each other every month for the next 33 years, until my father died in 2008. They became close friends. They visited each other's homes. Mr. Ogawa came to my wedding. When my father died, Mr. Ogawa flew from Japan to Ohio for the funeral and gave a eulogy that made everyone cry. He said, Jim Patterson was my enemy for 15 seconds. He has been my brother for 33 years. We are bonded by understanding what others cannot, that war makes victims of everyone, even the survivors, even the victors. Mr. Ogawa died in 2012, 4 years after my father. They're buried on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean, but I like to think they're together somewhere, two old warriors finally at peace. That's the human cost of war. Not just the men who die in combat, but the survivors who carry the ghosts. The men who did their duty and paid for it with nightmares. The families who loved them, but could never fully understand what they'd experienced. The bonds formed between former enemies who understood each other in ways no one else could. And all of it, all of that trauma, all of that suffering, all of those nightmares, because of a weapon that was designed to hunt ducks. By 1944, something unprecedented happened in Japanese military history. They abandoned their fundamental combat doctrine. When Marines landed on Peleliu in September 1944, they expected the usual pattern. Fierce initial resistance, followed by suicidal banzai charges that, while deadly, ultimately led to Japanese defeat. Instead, they found Japanese forces that refused to leave their fortified positions, refused to charge, refused to die gloriously. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, commanding Peleliu's defenders, had received new orders that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Spiritual strength alone cannot overcome American firepower. Each soldier will fight from prepared positions. There will be no banzai charges. Make the Americans come to you. A captured tactical manual from October 1944 stated bluntly, "Night attacks against enemies equipped with automatic weapons and shotguns result only in useless death. The age of the bayonet charge is over." The psychological impact was devastating. Captain Toshio Yamaguchi's notes described what he called the shotgun sickness spreading through his men. Private Sato refuses night patrol duty. When pressed, he begins shaking and speaking of the thunder guns. This fear spreads like disease. Yesterday, an entire squad claimed illness rather than conduct infiltration training. I can no longer tell my men that spiritual strength will overcome American technology. They know better. We all do. American intelligence noted the change. One Intercept analyst wrote, "6 months ago, Japanese radio traffic was all about honor and spiritual superiority. Now they're desperately requesting counter-shotgun tactics and methods to engage Americans beyond thunder gun range. They're asking Tokyo for weapons that don't exist. The irony? By abandoning their close combat doctrine, the Japanese made themselves harder to defeat." Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller observed, "We trained these boys to repel banzai charges with shotguns. Now the Japanese won't come out to be killed. They've learned our lessons too well." Marine casualties on Peleliu exceeded those of any previous Pacific battle precisely because the Japanese no longer offered themselves to American firepower. The transformation was complete. From aggressive, honor-bound warriors charging into death to calculating defenders fighting from fortifications. The shotgun hadn't just killed Japanese soldiers. It had killed their warrior mythology. Here's where the story gets really interesting. In 1954, 9 years after Japan's surrender, the newly formed Japanese Self-Defense Force issued its first equipment requirements. At the top of the list for close combat weapons, automatic shotguns. The same nation that had once condemned shotguns as dishonorable. The same military culture that had sent thousands of men to their deaths rather than adapt to them, now recognized shotguns as essential to modern military operations. Colonel Minoru Genda, who'd helped plan Pearl Harbor and survived to help build Japan's new military, supervised the procurement. When asked about including shotguns, he said simply, "We learned our lessons in blood. Only fools ignore such education." The Japanese government commissioned a study in 1952 called the Pacific War Tactical Analysis. It devoted an entire chapter to what it called the shotgun factor. The conclusion: American close combat superiority stemmed not from greater courage, but from practical weapon selection matched to actual combat conditions. Our refusal to acknowledge this reality caused approximately 70,000 unnecessary casualties. At a 1960 Veterans Conference in Tokyo, survivor Tadashi Kimura spoke for many when he said, We were not cowards. We were men asked to fight the future with the past. Our doctrine left us no choice. Our training prepared us to die gloriously, not to recognize when glory meant suicide. By the 1970s, Japan had completely reversed its military philosophy. The new doctrine emphasized firepower, technology, and force preservation. The warrior spirit remained, but tempered by pragmatism learned at terrible cost. Former Lieutenant General Toshio Tamagami, in a 1995 interview, provided perhaps the best summary. My generation died believing in sword against shotgun. We called Americans weak for choosing firepower over spirit, but they went home to their families while we became cherry blossoms, falling uselessly. If admitting this truth dishonors our dead, then perhaps honor itself needs redefinition. So what's the legacy of the Winchester Model 97 in the Pacific? What did the thunder in the jungle really teach us? First, it demonstrated the fatal danger of institutional rigidity. The Japanese military knew by late 1942 that their doctrine was failing. They continued it for 3 more years because admitting it was wrong would have required dismantling 50 years of military culture. Tens of thousands died in that gap between evidence and acceptance. Second, it proved that material factors trump philosophy in warfare. This seems obvious now, but in 1942, the Japanese genuinely believed that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantages. The shotgun disproved this so decisively that it transformed an entire military culture. Third, it showed the importance of asymmetric adaptation. Rather than try to match Japanese mastery of close combat, Marines found a weapon that made that mastery irrelevant. Modern special operations forces still study this principle. The shotgun's legacy extends to today. In Iraq and Afghanistan, American forces used shotguns extensively for urban combat, primarily for breaching and close-quarters defense. The Benelli M4 shotgun is standard issue for many units. The principle remains. At close quarters, combat belongs to whoever brings the most efficient tool. But perhaps the deepest lesson is about the human cost of outdated doctrine. How many young men, Japanese and American, paid the price for institutional inability to adapt? How many families lost sons, brothers, fathers to the gap between mythology and reality? In 2023, a Japanese self-defense force lieutenant visited his 98-year-old grandfather, Hiroshi Yamada, the survivor of that nightmare on New Georgia 80 years earlier. "You know we train with shotguns now at the Special Forces School," the lieutenant said. Yamada smiled sadly. 80 years ago, I watched that weapon destroy my entire company in 4 minutes. I hated it, feared it, thought it was a coward's weapon. Now our own military trains with it. Does that bother you? No, Yamada replied. It gives me peace. It means my friends didn't die for nothing. Their deaths taught us that beautiful doctrine kills, that practical wisdom protects. Tell your soldiers, that shotgun isn't just a weapon. It's a reminder that effectiveness matters more than tradition, that true honor lies in bringing your people home alive. The thunder in the jungle fell silent in 1945, but its lessons echo still. War punishes beautiful philosophies and rewards brutal pragmatism. There is no honor in sending men to die with obsolete tactics. The greatest courage lies not in charging into certain death, but in admitting when cherished doctrines have failed. And those who call pragmatism cowardice have never heard the sound of buckshot in the jungle.